When Donald Trump escalated tensions with Canada by imposing sweeping tariffs, the initial response from Canadians was a mix of disbelief, outrage, and mobilization. While many observers initially treated his trade actions and inflammatory rhetoric as standard Trumpian brinkmanship, the consequences for Canada quickly proved to be far more profound. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. The impact is no longer limited to headlines or political commentary. It has reshaped daily life, economic strategy, cultural consumption, and national identity in ways that suggest a long-term recalibration of the Canada-US relationship. Prime Minister Mark Carney, speaking in the early months of the dispute, warned that Canada's old relationship with the United States could not survive the current political climate. At the time, his comments were widely interpreted as cautionary, almost rhetorical. Yet, in the months since Trump's tariff measures and provocative 51st state taunts, Carney's prediction has manifested across multiple dimensions: travel, trade, retail, culture, and political sentiment. Each reveals a Canadian society increasingly willing to assert its independence and reduce its dependence on the United States. Understanding the scale of the current rupture requires a historical perspective. The Canada-US relationship has been unique in modern history. The two nations share the world's longest undefended border, a deeply intertwined economy, and strong cultural connections. Trade agreements like the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement (FTA) of 1989, NAFTA in 1994, and the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement (CUSMA) in 2020 institutionalized economic interdependence. Canadian manufacturers, service providers, and exporters long relied on seamless access to U.S. markets for growth, while American investment poured into Canada. Culturally, the influence of the United States on Canada has been equally pervasive. American television, movies, music, and literature have dominated Canadian media consumption for decades. Border towns thrived on weekend shopping trips, summer vacations often crossed into the U.S., and business travel was a routine part of professional life. Canadians had long assumed this interconnectedness was permanent, natural, and mutually beneficial. Trump's tariffs, however, disrupted this long-standing pattern. By imposing duties on Canadian steel, aluminum, and other critical exports, the Trump administration not only challenged Canada's economic assumptions but also injected symbolic affront into the bilateral relationship. His assertion that Canada was effectively the 51st state of the United States added insult to injury. The combination of tariffs and rhetoric served as a catalyst for Canadians to reconsider their long-standing reliance on the U.S., producing what many analysts now recognize as a structural shift in policy and behavior. The economic consequences of the rupture are clear and measurable. Canadian exports to the United States, though still significant, have begun to plateau, and some sectors show outright declines. Simultaneously, trade with non-U.S. markets has surged. Europe, Asia, and South America have become increasingly important destinations for Canadian goods, reflecting both government initiatives and private sector adjustments. The federal government has been proactive in encouraging this diversification. Trade missions, new free trade agreements, and incentives for Canadian businesses to explore alternative markets are underway. These strategies are designed not merely as a response to Trump-era tariffs but as a long-term hedge against future geopolitical instability. Companies once entirely dependent on the U.S. market are now looking to Europe, Japan, China, and other emerging economies for growth opportunities, demonstrating a significant shift in strategic thinking. Many Canadian businesses have embraced this change as an opportunity rather than a setback. For example, agricultural exporters are exploring niche European markets for specialty crops, while manufacturers in Ontario and Quebec are cultivating relationships with Asian distributors. The message is clear. Canada is preparing to thrive independently of the United States, even if full economic decoupling remains unlikely. Alongside trade adjustments, a grassroots consumer movement has taken hold. The Buy Canadian campaign, initially a reaction to tariffs and Trump's inflammatory rhetoric, has now become a mainstream practice shaping Canadian retail and shopping habits. Grocery chains and retailers are leading the way, expanding Canadian product lines while reducing U.S. offerings. Produce, packaged goods, and household staples once dominated by American suppliers are being replaced with Canadian alternatives. Some U.S. brands have disappeared entirely from shelves, while domestic companies gain permanent presence. The economic effect is tangible. Canadian farmers, producers, and small businesses are benefiting from increased demand, and retailers are reporting strong consumer support for domestic goods. The trend extends beyond food. Electronics, clothing, furniture, and even personal care products increasingly feature Canadian brands or sourcing. Analysts suggest these changes are likely to endure, regardless of future U.S. political developments. For many Canadians, purchasing domestic products has become both a symbolic gesture and a practical assertion of national independence. The most dramatic sign of the rupture is in travel. Historically, cross-border movement was routine. Canadians drove to U.S. border towns for shopping, flew to major cities for leisure, and conducted professional travel across the border without disruption. Those patterns have now shifted dramatically. According to Statistics Canada, Canadian car trips into the U.S. fell 34% in August compared to the same month the previous year, marking the 8th consecutive month of year-over-year decline, an unprecedented phenomenon outside global crises like COVID-19. Air travel shows a similar trend. Canadians flying from U.S. airports dropped 25.4% in August, while U.S. Customs data shows that roughly 1.3 million fewer Canadians crossed into the U.S. in July compared to July 2024. Airlines have been forced to respond. Major carriers, including Air Canada, WestJet, Flair, and Porter, have reduced flights and cancelled routes due to weak demand. Border towns on both sides are feeling the effects. Canadian businesses report fewer shoppers traveling south, and U.S. border communities report reduced tourism revenue. This decline is not limited to casual travelers. Business trips, academic exchanges, and cultural visits have also dropped, suggesting a broader reevaluation of cross-border interactions. Cultural consumption is also shifting. Historically dominated by American media, the Canadian entertainment market is seeing increased support for domestic content. Canadian authored books are achieving record sales, Canadian musicians are enjoying greater domestic attention, and streaming services report higher engagement with Canadian films and series. These changes reflect both political response and national pride. Many Canadians are consciously choosing to support domestic artists, signaling a desire to strengthen cultural sovereignty and reduce American influence. Analysts note that these trends may continue for years, shaping both the content produced and consumed in Canada. The rupture has also influenced political attitudes. Polls indicate growing skepticism of U.S.-style populism and republicanism, with renewed support for Canadian institutions, including the monarchy. King Charles's recent visit reinforced a sense of continuity and stability, providing a counterpoint to the perceived volatility of American governance. The political implications are profound. Canadians are asserting a more autonomous national identity, emphasizing domestic policy priorities and global partnerships beyond the United States. This could influence everything from economic policy to cultural investment, strengthening Canada's ability to pursue independent strategies on the world stage. Experts describe the current situation as a historic rupture in North American relations. Mark Carney called Trump's actions a rupture in the global order, requiring new approaches to diplomacy and economic strategy. Canadian economists largely agree, viewing the diversification of trade and cultural consumption as both a defensive measure and an opportunity for growth. Trump's ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra, acknowledged the strain, noting, "All of these types of things, I'm sorry, that doesn't tell me that Canada is passionate about this relationship in the same way that we are." His statement underscores a critical reality. Canada is redefining its relationship with the U.S. on its own terms, prioritizing sovereignty, resilience, and long-term stability. While the full consequences remain uncertain, trends suggest the Canada-U.S. relationship is entering a new era. Trade patterns are diversifying, travel continues to decline, consumer behavior favors domestic products, and cultural and political attitudes are evolving. Canadians are actively charting a path toward greater independence, reducing reliance on the United States while cultivating alternative partnerships and internal strength. Even if future U.S. administrations adopt a more cooperative stance, Canadians have demonstrated a willingness to maintain autonomy in trade, culture, and governance. The rupture represents not a temporary flare-up but a long-term realignment that could redefine North American integration for decades. What began as a response to tariffs and political rhetoric has evolved into a comprehensive recalibration of Canada's economic, cultural, and political life. It is a transformation with implications for businesses, governments, and individuals alike, signaling a new chapter in Canada's national story, one defined by independence, resilience,